Part 36. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 365. A Way Out. When he saw a light representing a way out getting closer and closer in the ripples on the water, Su Tong couldn't help but have a flash of light in his eyes. But at this time, a strong sense of oppression came from behind, and a strong uneasiness prompted Su Tong's body to instinctively fall forward and fall to the ground. A palm appeared out of thin air, but only one palm appeared, as if it was a hand that had been severed out of thin air. Before the palm could grab his shoulder, Su Tong sidestepped and dodged it. But the palm of his hand did not give up, and he grabbed forward again, but this time Su Tong was already on guard, and the fierceness in his eyes instantly became stronger. After rolling on the ground, he raised his hands and used a mountain button to slam down on the severed hand. Suddenly, the space in front of his eyes was split, and the void changed. A pair of palms seemed to be protruding from the netherworld, and they were densely grasping. This severed hand pulled it directly into the crack leading to the underworld. Looking at the missing severed hand, Su Tong felt uneasy, because it was not Zhao Sisen's real palm, but just a small trick on his part. Sure enough, as the severed hand disappeared, Zhao Sisen was seen chasing after him from a distance, with a leisurely posture and a step of disowning his relatives. Every step seemed to announce the approach of death. It's a very unique technique. It uses magic to guide Taoism, open up the mysterious gate, and open up the nether world. It has 3 parts of Tao Qi, 3 parts of magic power, and a little bit of the earth Qi of a rogue in the market. It's amazing. It's really amazing. Zhao Sisen's face was full of joy. After another test just now, he was even more convinced that what Su Tong performed was by no means an ordinary technique. His skills were close to Taoism. Although there was a suspicion of a sneak attack at 3 points, in the world, the only way to win is to win. Wang Dao, means is just a process. This kind of thaumaturgy is naturally impossible for a young boy to create. Such a pity. Thinking of this, Zhao Sisen's face was full of regret, and he looked at Su Tong with extremely complicated expressions in his eyes. This sound of pity also contains many complex emotions. If he had met such a young man 3 years earlier, he would have definitely shown him a clear path. If it had been 3 years earlier, I might have personally visited this young man's sect and met the great master who created this technique. There have never been rumors about this technique in the world, so I guess this great master must have just created this technique not long ago. However, he did not receive the slightest information in this regard, which shows that this great master must also be an expert who is dedicated to hiding in the world. If the two could meet, they might become close friends. However, with this cry of regret, Zhao Sisen knew that none of this was possible. After this incident, everyone in the world will focus on Lianshan Temple, and he will be able to set off smoothly according to the next plan. No accident, it will only take 3 months. By the time everyone in the world discovers that Lianshan Temple is just a trap, he has already far away overseas. No one can hope to find me again. Su Tong stood up slowly and glanced sideways at the wave of waves on the river, only to find that although this vitality was strong, it did not intersect with him. It's like you've obviously found the other party's whiff signal and it's still full, but without the password you can only stare. Su Tong had such a feeling now. In front of him was Zhao Sisen, who was pressing every step of the way. He was not in the right place at the right time, and there were even 2 unconscious drag bottles beside him. Facing such a peak grandmaster in front of him, if he wants to survive, the only way to survive is that ray of life. But life is right in front of him, but across the vast river, he can't swim across it. At least Su Tong doesn't think this is a good idea. My child, you have extraordinary powers, but you are still too immature. Go on your way as soon as possible. Zhao Sisen is not a sentimental person. On the contrary, he has already made plans to abandon his family and even his children for this plan. Not only will he abandon them, but if his plan does not go wrong, they will soon become the ones he throws away. Next bait. After the words fell, Zhao Sisen's eyes darkened slightly. In an instant, a figure appeared in front of Su Tong out of thin air from more than 10 meters away. Su Tong's face changed suddenly. Watching Zhao Sisen slowly raise his palm, the time around him seemed to freeze at this moment. There. Between reality and reality, there was an obvious disconnect between him and the world around him. In the midst of this, he couldn't do anything. He could only watch Zhao Sisen's hand pat down on his Tianling Gai. Is this the final outcome? Su Tong slowly closed his eyelids, as if he was ready to die, but the moment he closed his eyes, many people suddenly appeared in his mind uncontrollably. There is Gaozhou, there is a master, there is a master, there is also the old man in the lunatic asylum, his good brother, etc. No. This is not the end. After just a short moment of walking around, every clear face appeared in his mind. He was not afraid of death, but he could never die here. At least he didn't want to die in a daze before seeing all the scenery in this world. In a strange world. He couldn't accept this ending. Thinking of this, Su Tong took a deep breath, and a cold light flashed under his slightly closed eyelids. Hey, it's time for you to come out and pay the rent. Demon had arrived. The black hair and eyebrows suddenly ignited, and every pore on the body burst out with black flames. One after another, terrifying black flame explosion ripples came one after another. Huh! A sound of surprise came from the extremely distant river. I saw a lone boat moving slowly in the Daotao River. No matter how rough the river was, this lone boat was always as stable as Mount Tai. No matter how big the waves were, it never fell and disappeared around a lone boat. On this lonely boat, there was neither a boatman nor a fisherman, only a drunken drunkard. But at this moment, the drunkard suddenly raised his head and glanced sideways at the distance beside him. His eyebrows were slightly raised, which actually made the surroundings turbulent. The waves calmed down instantly. Strangeness. The drunkard said something strange and was about to fall down and continue sleeping. However, as soon as he lowered his head, he started tossing and turning again, and finally cursed, "I can't even sleep peacefully, go to hell." As he spoke, he picked up the sword at hand, jumped out of the boat, and walked on the river. At this time, Zhao Sisen was equally surprised. Looking at the black fire burning on his palm, his eyes showed surprise again. He raised his head and saw Su Tong half kneeling on the ground, panting heavily. Bright red blood dripped down the wound on his chest. But before it touched the ground, the blood was burned into a wisp of blue by the flames. Cigarette. Bad news, he was injured, and badly. But the good news is, he's still alive. Although he was embarrassed, it was indeed good news that he could survive under the hands of the Grand Master. "You idiot, why did you wake me up in the daytime?" What was different from before was that Su Tong could hear extremely anxious cursing in his ears at this moment. It seemed that the Demon King did not expect that Su Tong would wake him up at this time. Even if the demonic power has no effect during the day, the negativity brought about by the full-level dark constitution will still cause a certain amount of damage to his soul. Before Su Tong could explain, the devil's voice sounded again, but this time the taste changed. "Eh? Which guy left this mark on you?" The sharp voice was filled with shock and anger, as well as the smell of being caught in bed. Su Tong rubbed his shoulders helplessly, threw a Lingro blood revitalizing pill into his mouth, and said in a teasing tone, "If you don't want my soul to become a trophy for her to show off, then help me, at least, let me live. Asshole, I'll settle the score with you later." The Demon King finally realized the seriousness of the situation. Oh, this seriousness did not refer to Zhao Sisen in front of him, but to someone who dared to pick peaches under his eyes. However, he quickly extinguished the anger in his heart and let out a low, strange laugh, which became more and more crazier. Because he suddenly realized that this damn guy had such a strong desire to live out of nowhere. This is what he likes to see most. When there is desire, there is demand, and when there is demand, only he can get it. More tributes. Very good. I feel your sincerity, be prepared to pay the price. As the Demon King's voice disappeared, the demonic flames on Su Tong's body suddenly surged. Su Tong raised his head and watched Zhao Cixin wipe the magic flame on his hand a few times before extinguishing it. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle, and his expression was full of unruliness for a moment. Kill. With the word kill, Su Tong came towards his face with a black light with a strong fishy smell, and waved his fists, which was the close combat technique that Su Tong was familiar with. A young boy who has not even reached the level of a half-step master is actually taking the lead against a great master at this moment. If such a scene is seen by outsiders, their jaws will definitely drop in shock. Possessed. Sensing the ferocious demonic nature in Su Tong's body, Zhao Cixin's face became unusually solemn, and he stepped back half a step. The distance between the two people actually stretched infinitely with this step. Between reality and fiction. It is an ability that only great masters can comprehend. Even if it is a half-step master, if there is no great opportunity, he may not even be able to break through to this level in his lifetime. It is precisely because of this that when facing Zhao Cixin, Monk Huiwen was easily killed by Zhao Cixin without any backhand. But what Zhao Cixin probably didn't expect was that the young boy in front of him, who was not even a half-step master, had a very high level of understanding of the Grand Master. He even came to this place once with the help of the Master. Field. Facing Zhao Cixin's virtual reality, Su Tong did not retreat. Instead, he opened his hands and decisively activated the Ember Skill Extreme Flame Turbine. For a moment, the black magic flame exploded, and a large fire blade formed by corrosive fire burst out. For a moment, the soil under his feet was ignited by flames, and a terrifying firestorm began to spread wantonly in all directions. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 366. It's useless. Zhao Cixin's eyes were slightly lowered. To outsiders, he seemed to be swallowed up by the flames, but in fact, from Zhao Cixin's perspective, the flames were still far away from him. Not to mention burning him, you might not even be able to touch the corners of his clothes. Add this. A cold light appeared in Su Tong's eyes, and a gourd appeared above his head. I didn't know when it appeared on Su Tong's shoulder. And Dia was holding a gourd in her hand. After opening the stopper of the gourd, a strong storm spewed out from the mouth of the gourd. Boom. The wind borrows the power of fire, and fire borrows the force of the wind. Although the strong wind is bitingly cold, a large amount of water vapor is erupted under the baking of the magic flame. This undoubtedly increases the power of the extreme flame turbine, causing the flame to explode to a terrifying level in an instant. To the extreme. I told you, it's no use. Facing such a terrifying demonic flame in front of him, Zhao Cixin remained unmoved, but he felt a bad feeling in his heart. Is it really useless? Old guy, you see clearly. Su Tong's voice came from the flames. Following his roar, Zhao Cixin suddenly noticed from the corner of his eyes that the corners of his clothes started to move. Although it was only a very small amount, it still made Zhao Cicin's face change drastically. This is impossible. No matter how small the swing of the clothes is, it means that the relationship between reality and reality has begun to fail. Even if this does not affect him, something that even a half-step master cannot do is actually done by a young boy. Here it is, this is completely beyond Zhao Cicin's cognition. When falsehood becomes true, truth is also false. Inaction exists and returns to nothing. Nothing is impossible. Su Tong was very aware of the terrifying aspects of the Grand Master, but it was precisely because he knew the way inside that he gave him a way to crack it. Even if he is a Grand Master, what is false after all. The only problem is that his own can power break through this layer of falsehood. Hiss. When Zhao Cixin heard this, his face flickered. He did not expect that the great master, who was mysterious and unpredictable in the eyes of all living beings, would be exposed to the key by a young boy. What's more, I didn't expect that this kid would have such powerful explosive power after becoming possessed. With the horror in his heart, his eyes were even more murderous. Even if the other party did not become a Grand Master, based on these words, he had to die today, otherwise a Grand Master would rise from the ground soon. As soon as he thought of this, he pointed his finger towards the void in front of him. Thousands of silver needles appeared in the air, and Zhao Cixin waved the silver needles on his fingertips. The sea of fire in front of him seemed to be torn apart by the dense rainstorm in an instant. Although the silver needle is small, it has the power to cut through rivers. When he killed the monk Huiwen, Zhao Cixin only used one. Now facing Su Tong, there were tens of millions of them. It was enough to show that the young boy in front of him had a lot of desire in his heart. What a threat! But what Zhao Cixin may not have expected is that Su Tong also moved the moment the silver needle flew. Crossing his hands on his chest, he bowed heavily in front of him, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Suddenly, a crack opened in front of him, but this time, the hole was much bigger and stronger than before. A large number of wandering souls poured out of the crack, like a torrent, overwhelming the sky and hitting it. Puff puff. The silver needle penetrated these fierce ghosts, and it only needed a hole no bigger than a sesame seed to beat them to death in an instant. Even though it is the most powerful magic in the world, it has not yet been perfected. But this is not the end, just a beginning. The first bow will hurt people's lives, the second bow will invite ghosts and gods, and the third bow will knock on the door of the king of hell. With the help of the rolling magic power in his body, Su Tong bowed vigorously for the third time. Although he didn't know the result of this prayer, this might be his last chance to fight back. Between the virtual and the real, unless you are a great master blessed by fate like she, the moment you take action will be the moment when your flaws are exposed, because there is always a falsehood between the virtual and the real, one virtual and the other real. Just like those who attack with all their strength, they must give up part of their defense. With this bow, Su Tong instantly felt as if something had been taken away from his body. In the deepest part of the crack, among countless palaces and buildings, a pair of slightly lowered eyes slowly looked toward this place. Sweep over. In the haze, on that blurry outline, there was a hint of expectation and a sense of coldness in his eyes. It was a pity that Su Tong was about to lose his strength now. After bowing, he could not see the blurry outline under the crack, so he did not notice the expectation for him in the eyes of the owner of the outline. Unfortunately, Zhao Cixin saw it, but there was no expectation, only coldness and ruthlessness. With just one glance, Zhao Cixin's face suddenly turned gray. How can mortals look directly at gods? Even for just a brief moment, Zhao Cixin's head felt like a hammer, and the thousands of silver needles he summoned disappeared in an instant. What's worse is that in such a short moment of loss, a large number of innocent souls, the fierce ghost hit Zhao Cixin like a torrent. Ah! Zhao Cixin let out a muffled scream. He probably never dreamed that he would actually lose, to a young boy who was not even a half-step master. In fact, in terms of strength, Zhao Cixin's strength must be higher than that of Su Tong, but after all, this is not a data battle in an online game. The victory or defeat depends entirely on the data. He was so small that the energy that the young boy in front of him could burst out, even if it was within the scope of his understanding, he had already raised this boy to the sky with a serious move. He even underestimated the hard work that Shuigui, who was destined to do, had put into Su Tong, his disciple, and even, the backhand he had secretly left behind. With a scream, Zhao Cixin was pushed to the ground by this force, blood suddenly flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was filled with disbelief. Fortunately, Su Tong was already out of strength, and this prayer almost drained all the strength from his body. The prop book is even sending out reminders like crazy. Warning, you are using power illegally. Warn. Using power illegally will quickly extend your lifespan. Warning, lifespan -10. These reminders are no longer important to Su Tong. The power of the devil's arrival has reached the critical point. With the disappearance of the devil's power, pain comes like a tide. Cough. Zhao Sisin spat out a mouthful of bloody phlegm. Looking at the figure lying on the ground, there was a trace of fear in his eyes. At this moment, Su Tong fell to the ground. At first glance, he looked like a charred skeleton with bloody flesh. There were vicious wounds everywhere, and white smoke was oozing out. Not only the skin and flesh, but also the internal organs also suffered huge damage. However, what is strange is that new and tender sprouts are growing on his body at a speed visible to the naked eye. If you look closely, you can even see these sprouts, like bean sprouts growing in the soil, which adds a bit of weirdness to him. And the taste of terror. But even if the boy in front of him now has no possibility of fighting again, this fear is still lingering in his heart and difficult to dissipate. No. Being severely injured by a boy who was not even half a master, and even having his vitality damaged, was simply the shame of a master, and Zhao Sisin couldn't help but feel a strong sense of frustration in his heart. Zhao Sisin, whose eyes were red, looked at the guy lying on the ground with only the air coming out but not in. He finally couldn't help the anger in his heart, and reached out to twist his head off. Only if this kid died completely could he calm down the anger in his heart. Terrified and uneasy. But as soon as he stretched out his hand, a strong smell of alcohol hit his face, and he heard a burst of laughter from behind. Ha 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 ha, the majestic Grand Master was beaten to the point of vomiting blood. It's rare. Ha ha ha, it's rare for a really special girl. Who? Zhao Sisin was startled, and when he raised his head, he saw an alcoholic appearing next to Su Tong. He smelled of alcohol and was standing there swaying, holding a broken sword in his hand. Who are you? Zhao Sisin quickly retreated, but the other party stumbled forward, his body pressed against Zhao Sisin's arms, and he opened his mouth and burped at Zhao Sisin. You know so many things, why don't you know who I am? Zhao Sisin's pupils tightened. Who exactly are you? Hey, I won't tell you. Let's have a fight. If you agree, I'll tell you, the drunkard said, and reached out to grab Zhao Sisin. Grabbing it with calloused palms, Zhao Sisin had the illusion that the world was vast and there was nowhere to hide. Zhao Sisin groaned in his heart. He glanced at Su Tong unwillingly from the corner of his eye, gritted his teeth, turned around and ran away. Hey, don't leave. Seeing that Zhao Sisin was about to escape, the drunkard reached out and grabbed him on the shoulder. However, the grip felt light and airy, waiting for the drunkard to take a closer look. Only then did he realize that what he was holding in his hand was just a pair of loose clothes. Looking down again, the drunkard smiled. I ran in such a hurry, I didn't even need my shoes and pants, and I'm a grand master with you. It's such an injustice. As he spoke, the drunkard shook his hand and saw a piece of human skin coming out of his clothes. Sorry, it's so late today. There's a power outage at home. I live on the 27th floor and I haven't received a call after waiting for an hour. I can only take my girl and my wife and my luggage and go out to find a hotel. It takes me half an hour just to climb downstairs, mainly holding things and holding my daughter, which took a lot of time. Sorry. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 367. Su Tong had a dream. In the dream, he saw his master and his master. They were sitting at the end of Nahi Bridge, waiting for him. The master was wearing a red mandarin jacket and holding a small flag in his hand. The master was wearing a black brocade robe with his hair on his head. Wearing a crown. Boy, just go home. The master always had a kind smile on his face, and the master on the side held a small flag. Go this way, look at the mountain over there. Su Tong looked around and saw that it was a mountain of bones with no end in sight. The mountain was full of blue flowers, and the fat petals actually showed patterns of human faces, and each face was different. Master patted him on the shoulder. He belongs to our family. Then he pointed to the river on the side. The river was rolling like a river, but it was crystal clear, but there were no fish in it, only water floats. It's from our family. With a proud face on his face, the master pointed to the sea of flowers and jungle in the distance, and said the same thing, ours. Finally, he pointed behind him. Su Tong looked back and saw Lilith, wearing a neat kitchen skirt, standing in front of the stove with a knife and fork, playing with a plate of beef. This belongs to our family too. Su Tong answered with gleaming eyes. However, when the voice fell, the master and master smiled coldly and said in unison, no, that's yours. I saw Lilith raising the rolling pin in her hand as if feeling something, staring at Su Tong with her charming eyes, and licking the rolling pin with her enchanting tongue. Oh! Su Tong was so excited that he suddenly woke up from his dream. He opened his eyelids and didn't have time to focus his sight. He only saw a blurry black shadow in front of him. Su Tong punched it without thinking, they are all from my family. Ouch! After this punch, there was a burst of screams, and immediately Li 11's sharp voice was heard shouting aggrievedly, Brother Ma, what are you from our family? I belong to my family, but I belong to the royal family. Su Tong took a closer look and realized that he was lying on the bed, and the person standing next to him was actually Li 11. Eh? Why is it you? After Su Tong finished speaking, he had a splitting headache and quickly lay down again, unable to remember what happened. Li 11 covered his face and got up from the ground. Seeing that he woke up, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, you finally woke up. If you don't wake up, I don't know what to do. Regardless of whether Li 11 was sincere or pretentious at this moment, he did not want Master Ma to die in this place. If Ma Hongwen died, he would lose a big supporter. Secondly, Ma Hongwen died here. Even if Ma Chi was worried about going to the Kintian prison and would not do anything to Yang Gongjing, if his anger were turned on him, he would not be able to stay in the palace any longer. Without the protection of the palace, he could only live in exile. Then wouldn't his sword be in vain? I didn't even have time to use it. So seeing Ma Hongwen wake up at this moment, Li 11 naturally breathed a long sigh of relief. In fact, when he and Yang Gongjing woke up, they were also shocked when they found Su Tong lying on the ground. He was as black as charcoal. If it weren't for the fact that there were still some pieces of clothes on him, they wouldn't have done anything. I dare to believe that this is Ma Hongwen. At that time, Yang Gongjing only said, it depends on fate. The underlying meaning was that there was no need to save her. Not to mention Yang Gongjing, even Li 11 himself felt that Master Ma was going to die in a foreign land. Who knew that after one night, Li 11 was shocked to find that Su Tong's injuries had actually healed a lot. Even his vital signs began to stabilize, so Yang Gongjing couldn't let him go anymore. She took him back to Lianshan County and found a crappy local doctor to treat his injuries. In this way, Su Tong was unconscious for 3 whole days, and it was only now that he finally woke up. So, when you found me, I was already fainting on the ground, but you didn't see Zhao Sisson. Su Tong closed his eyes and finally recalled the scene after he gave up in his head that was about to turn into paste. However, it was obvious that besides himself and Zhao Sisson, there was a mysterious person who saved them, but when Li 11 and the others woke up, they said they had not seen each other. Could it be that the other party is a good person who is brave enough to do what is right? He tried to recall the other person's appearance, but his mind was so dizzy that he couldn't recall a single memory. The only impression in his mind seemed to be a strong smell of alcohol. "Brother Ma, you must be hungry. You need to rest first and I'll find you something to eat." When Li 11 saw that Su Tong was silent, he thought he must be hungry, so he hurried out to find some food for Su Tong. After Li 11 left, Su Tong called out the props book and took a look. Only then did he realize how bad his condition was. In addition to being deprived of 10 years of life, he now has extensive wounds and is in a semi-paralyzed state. Moreover, because he maximized the power of the Dark Lord, his demonic power card has become gray, suspended state. Coupled with the script points consumed, it can definitely be considered a heavy loss. However, Su Tong felt that it was worth paying such a high price, not only because he was able to save a life from the hands of a great master, but also because he really knocked on the door of the King of Hell's family this time. Even with the help of the Demon King's power, since he can knock it open once, it means that he can knock it open a second time, a third time, or even open it at any time. As for whether the King of Hell bothers him or not, will he ask himself? Once you have a meal, you won't have to worry about so much anymore. After a while, Yang Gongjing walked in. Yang Gongjing was also surprised when he learned that Ma Hongwen had woken up. From his understanding, an ordinary person would have died long ago from such a serious injury. Even those martial arts masters who have struggled for more than 10 years in martial arts schools may not survive. But Ma Hongwen actually survived, which had to impress him. When I entered the palace, my father was worried about such a day, so he gave me a life-saving elixir. It must be the effect of this elixir. Seeing the confusion on Yang Gongjing's face, Su Tong took the initiative to explain. This is half true and half false. The fact that he was able to survive and recover so quickly was naturally due to Ling Yan's blood-activating pill, but a larger part of the reason was due to the effects of his dark physique on him at night. Powerful recovery effect. So that's it? Yang Gongjing nodded thoughtfully, and he could accept this explanation, because Ma Qi's official position and authority were real. Even though he abided by the specifications and always maintained the treatment of the third grade, privately, those who saw it were wherever you go, there is a lot of profit. And Ma Hongwen is Ma Qi's only son, so it would not be too much to give him some means to save his life. It's just that such a magical elixir must be extremely valuable. It would be a waste to give it to a guy like Ma Hongwen. Yang Gongjing could never change her bad impression of Ma Hongwen. You can't blame him, after all, Ma Hongwen's reputation in the capital is really. Immediately, Yang Gongjing asked about what happened at Lianshan Temple. Su Tong covered his head and thought for a moment before explaining to Yang Gongjing. But he hid things about Zhao Sisson. It wasn't that he meant to protect Zhao Sisson, but he was afraid that Yang Gongjing wouldn't believe it if he told it himself. Not to mention how a student who advocated new learning transformed into a great master. He just saved his life under the hands of a great master. If I say this, no one will believe it. A great master, a land god-like figure, crushing a half-step grandmaster to death is the same as crushing an ant to death. Su Tong did not even meet the standard of a half-step grandmaster, and was at best an ant's leg. When the other party sneezes, he flies away, and yet he fights the other party and successfully repels him. This was either a joke or crazy talk. Yang Gongjing was afraid that if he said it, he would wonder if his brain was damaged because he could even say such a thing. Since it was a thankless task, why should Su Tong take the credit for himself? So he simply explained that as for his injuries, they were all injured by those crazy guys in order to save them in the illusion. After hearing Su Tong's words, the expression on Yang Gongjing's face couldn't help but improve a lot. At least the look in her eyes when she looked at Su Tong was no longer as disdainful as before. After all, whether it is true or not, their lives were saved by Ma Hongwen. This alone is a huge credit. So, there is no holy son of White Lotus, no yin soldiers, everything is made up by others. Yang Gongjing still couldn't believe it. He said that he should have a good rest in the yamen and he would investigate the rest. After Yang Gongjing left, Li 11 sent the matter about Lianshan Temple to the governor's desk that night, and the governor immediately sent people to the capital at high speed. But this time, no matter how fast the speed is, it is not something where news can be obtained in a day or two. Su Tong naturally started to slack off with peace of mind. Dia brings a chicken back from outside every day and throws it in the kitchen. Although Li 11 doesn't know where the chicken comes from, he cooks food for Su Tong in different ways every day, not to mention that Li 11's craftsmanship is not bad. In such a barren era, Li 11 actually showed amazing talent in making chickens. After eating for several days, Su Tong didn't feel tired. Instead, he enjoyed this time very much. After all, there is nothing more comfortable than having your enemy serve you meticulously every day. Although he couldn't move physically, he didn't just lie on the bed. With a stick of yellow incense, he could mentally escape into the hall, read a book, and calm himself down. It was also a pleasure to take a break from the busy work. In this way, the group of people rested in Lianshan County for half a month. Su Tong started walking around early. After all, the main task was not over yet, and he was worried that Zhao Sisan would come back again. If Yang Gongjing was killed, he would, but all the work was in vain. Brother Ma. Su Tong had just walked out of the room that day when he heard Li 11's shout. Looking back, he saw Li 11 walking into the yard with 3 people with a happy face. Li 11 walked forward and introduced to Su Tong, "These 3 are my friends, Huowaji, Kinjabian, and Know-It-All." After speaking, he hurriedly said to the 3 of them, "Quick, this is the one I told you about. Mr. Ma, who understands justice well." The 3 people couldn't help but look at each other after hearing this, and uniformly raised their hands towards Su Tong. "Greetings, Mr. Ma." Su Tong looked over the 3 of them. When he saw the familiar face of Qian Shao, he couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth slightly. He grinned and said, "You 2 are welcome. Li 11 and I are as close as brothers. Since you 3, he is Li 11's brother, and he is also the sibling of my Ma, just call me Brother Ma from now on." The 3 of them had already learned about Ma Hongwen's background from Li 11. They thought that because of his high status, he would look down on people like them, but they didn't expect that he would be so cordial when he opened his mouth. They looked at each other and said again, "Brother Ma." "Hey." Su Tong smiled brightly, and suddenly felt that happiness is always so simple. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 368. At the dinner table in Lianshan County Yamen, the aroma of wine overflowed. Huowaji had a chicken in his left hand and a duck in his right hand, and his mouth was full of oil. At the same time, Li 11 and the others did not forget to toast Su Tong. Su Tong drank happily, patted the arms of Huowaji and others and said, "We are all brothers. When we go back this time, we dare not say anything else. From now on, we can eat delicacies from the mountains and seas as we please. We share the blessings and share the hardships. Cheers." "Thank you, Brother Ma. I will follow you to the death." Huowaji was a rough man. He was overjoyed when he heard this. He raised the wine glass in his hand and drank it. The arrival of Huowaji and the others naturally made Su Tong feel surprised, but also felt an indescribable melancholy. In the previous script world, except for Huowaji, Li 11 and the other 3 were his biggest enemies. Now that their identities have been reversed, Li 11 and the gang of scourges who brought trouble to the world actually sit with him and call themselves brothers. I have to sigh, things are changing, and this year it's coming to my house. Lianshan County is poor in resources, so there is naturally no place to entertain people with good wine or meat. Fortunately, Li 11 is not bad at craftsmanship and cooks chickens for everyone to enjoy. As for Yang Gongjing, She didn't take the three of them seriously. Anyway, we were short of manpower now, so one more person would be more helpful. They were enjoying themselves here, but little did they know that the wind in the court was already tense. It turned out that Yang Gongjing's memorial immediately caused a chaos after it was delivered to the court. People of the new school of thought took this opportunity to criticize in the court. The theory of ghosts and gods is pure nonsense and charlatans. At the same time, it is an excuse to play on the topic. The strict imperial examination system is outdated and decadent. The world only knows how to study hard and has no clue about the facts. It is useless and should be abolished. While refuting the old ministers, he also proposed new policies and strategies to establish industry and commerce, promote new learning, and build a new army. Because of this incident, the court was completely blown away. Your Majesty, these students just don't know where the sky is from the ground, and the policies they pursue are all nonsense. I sincerely ask the prince to come to the palace. No matter what, we can't let these idiots continue to delay the country and the country. The ministers in the court who had been refuted red-faced were gathering in Prince Gong's palace at this time. However, unlike the numb and angry expressions in the court, these ministers were calm at this moment. In words, he hoped that Prince Gong would take up the responsibility of assisting the prince as soon as possible, but his demeanor was neither hasty nor slow, and even his words became fluent. For example, the speaker at this moment is Li Jian, Minister of the Ministry of Household Affairs. The new students in the court refuted him to no avail. At that time, Li Jian was slurring his words, so angry that he was out of breath, and looked like he was going to faint at any moment. Even the Emperor of Datong frowned when he saw it, wondering how this old waste climbed to this position. But now that my hands are not shaking, my eyes are not blurry, and I have a cup of fragrant tea, I can't find the embarrassment in the court today. Just listen to him continue. If you don't take care of it, Your Majesty, the old minister will not be able to take care of the Hubu family. In the end, this burden will fall, so you might as well hire someone else. Prince Gong glanced at him, and he was already very angry, but he still managed to squeeze out a smile on his face. Haha, Master Li, what are you talking about? It's just, Xiao Wang has only shallow qualifications after all, and it's time for the emperor to show his talents. Coming forward is counterproductive. Then I won't bother you to step forward, but when trouble occurs, don't blame me and other veterans. Mud can't hold up a wall. Another veteran wearing a first-class court official's coat stood up and said angrily. Prince Gong's face suddenly turned cold. Fortunately, Li Jian quickly waved his hand. Nonsense, what are you talking about? We ministers, after all, are subjects of the unification, who live on the emperor's salary and worry about the country. How can you be such a child's play? Sit down. After Li Jian finished speaking, he tilted his head and looked at Prince Gong. Seeing the unkind look on Prince Gong's face, he immediately smiled. Long live the Lord. Naturally he is full of energy, but it seems that he has gone in the wrong direction. I and other veterans must also serve the late emperor, think about the country. After speaking, he took out a memorial and handed it to Prince Gong. I'm not here to embarrass the prince, but to ask him to prepare for a rainy day. After saying that, Li Jian and others stood up and left. The group of people came and left in a hurry. The butler came up and started to curse. These old guys must be out of their minds. They were scolded bloody by several students in the court, and they came here to show off. I'm tired of living, my lord. As soon as the butler turned around, his heart skipped a beat. He immediately shut his mouth and stood aside honestly. I saw Prince Gong looking at the memorial in his hand. A smile appeared on his face for a moment. He picked up the teacup in his hand and took a sip of the fragrant tea in his hand. Then he looked up and saw the butler, who was afraid to speak. He waved his hand and motioned for the butler to come forward. When the butler moved his head forward, Prince Gong raised his hand and slapped the butler on the face. "Haha, you are such an idiot." Prince Gong pointed at the butler and opened his mouth. In the end, he really didn't know how to explain to this idiot, so he could only wave his hand. "Forget it, I can't explain to you, I can only understand. It cannot be expressed in words." After saying that, he sent the butler off, but then he thought of something and said, "Come back." "Your Majesty." The butler came back with a confused look on his face. "Isn't Xiang Gongbeo back? I sent someone to leave a message for him and said I would treat him to dinner." After Prince Gong finished speaking, he stood up and walked to the mina, teasing the mina with his fingers. "Come, call the emperor." Another half-month passed in the blink of an eye. Yang Gongjing finally waited for the approval from the court, asking them to bring evidence and return to Beijing to report their work. At the same time, he also ordered the local magistrate to bring people to reinforce him. So a large group of people rushed to Xianglianshan Temple again. This time without the interference of Zhao Sisson, everyone saw the rotting corpses on the ground as soon as they entered. Su Tong and others stood behind calmly. Seeing that the officers and soldiers continued to walk, they quickly reminded Yang Gongjing in a low voice that it was here that they fell into someone's spell last time. Yang Gongjing is confident this time. She got it right here last time, so she won't make the same mistake again this time. He took out his compass and compared it carefully for a moment, then signaled the officers and soldiers to smash open the broken Buddha statue. The officers and soldiers didn't know what they were doing, but after they smashed it open, they found that there was nothing inside, so they could only smash it open. He looked at Yang Gongjing suspiciously. "Huh, that's it?" Yang Gongjing stepped forward and dug through the rocks a few times, then picked up one of the stone pipes in her hand. The stone pipe had been smashed, and it was precisely because of the smashing that you could see the stone made of it. There are actually many uneven places in the tube. Yang Gongjing carefully held the stone pipe in her hand. After carefully identifying it, she gently blew on it. Su Tong raised his brows slightly and clearly heard the strange sound. And everyone around them was in a daze for no reason. "Sir, is this some kind of spell?" Li 11 stepped forward and asked, staring at the stone tablet in Yang Gongjing's hand. "Idiot, this is not a spell, this is a kind of evil writing called ghost scripture." Yang Gongjing looked at Li 11 with contempt. Although she hated the little eunuch, she had to say that the little eunuch's stupidity could only set off her extraordinary knowledge. He explained to everyone, the theory of ghost scripture first appeared in the western regions. According to rumors, there is a ghost country in an extremely remote place in the western regions. This country has no writing. They leave their voices on the stone walls, and the wind blows gently. The voice on the stone tablet will come alive, and the voice will be read to future generations. The sound is left on the stone. How is this possible? Li 11 couldn't believe it and thought it was nonsense. Su Tong picked up a broken stone pipe and fumbled around with it. He felt that there were indeed dents on the stone pipe, and he understood immediately. "Master Yang, does the ghost scripture you are talking about have the same principle as the foreign gramophone?" Yang Gongjing was stunned for a moment after hearing this, and after thinking for a moment, she nodded. "It's almost the same, but this one is more advanced, because it only needs wind to make noise, and I once heard Mr. Ji Unzheng say that top masters the sound can be controlled within the range that ordinary people cannot hear, and can even be engraved on the utensils that are carried around. Then it only takes a wisp of breeze to cause hallucinations." Yang Gongjing mentioned a real case, which happened during the reign of Emperor Zheng. There was an old gentleman in the academy who taught seriously, but could not tolerate disdain in his eyes. One of the students was expelled from the school because he was late. The student held a grudge, stole the old man's jade pendant, and secretly burned a ghost scripture on it. I returned the thing the next day. There were no fonts in the ghost scripture, only potholes of varying depths. You couldn't tell if you didn't look carefully. The old gentleman went out to teach with a jade pendant, but when he was walking halfway, he suddenly heard someone calling him from behind. When he turned around, he saw his friend who had been with him for many years. So he stepped forward, but as a result, he stepped on something empty, slipped and fell into the river and drowned. After the old gentleman died, the jade pendant ended up in the market for some unknown reason. After several transactions, it finally fell into the hands of a butcher. The butcher loved the jade pendant so much that he couldn't bear to take it with him every day and wrapped it in a cloth bag. One day he couldn't bear it any longer, so he put on the jade pendant. As soon as he put on the jade pendant, he heard someone outside calling him to kill a pig. So the butcher picked up the butcher's knife and walked out. Sure enough, he saw a big fat pig. When the butcher saw the big fat pig coming towards him, his eyes lit up, he stepped forward and stabbed the pig in the neck. Then he started cutting the pig and meat on the spot. When the official came, I couldn't bear to look at the scene. The official grabbed the butcher and pinned him to the ground. At this time, the jade pendant just fell off. The butcher stared and realized that the pig he killed was clearly a human being. This man was already torn to pieces by him, and the butcher himself was disgusted by the scene. When Yang Gongjing said this, she suddenly sneered, the person killed by the butcher was the student who caused the trouble. As the saying goes, there is reincarnation in the way of heaven, and good and evil will eventually be rewarded. After hearing this, everyone suddenly got goosebumps all over their bodies. When they looked at the broken stone pipes on the ground, they were all filled with fear. Only Su Tong stood behind and said in a voice he could hear, "Believe me, you idiot, old man, the guy is very bad." Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 369. Now that she knew the principle, Yang Gongjing began to arrange it and asked people to use 10 iron nails to set up a wind-fixing structure around them. Without the stimulation of the wind, these ghost sutras would not be able to make a sound. A group of government officials began various violent demolitions, looking for the fragments of the ghost scripture, intending to collect them and bring them back to the capital as evidence. Then everyone went to the Buddhist hall at the back. The Buddhist temple had collapsed, and Monk Weiwen and the others were all buried underneath. Under Yang Gongjing's instructions, everyone began to dig through the rubble and dig out the bodies underneath. Some corpses were in good condition, while others had been smashed beyond recognition. Su Tong asked the government officials to carry them carefully, trying to carry out every corpse intact. Fortunately, the weather is cold now and the corpses are not very decomposed, otherwise the smell alone would be unpleasant enough. It is not difficult to see from the facial expressions of the corpses that these people did not understand what happened until they died. He died peacefully and emotionally. Oh, what a pity. Li 11 stood aside and sighed when he saw the corpses of the Zhu brothers. In the eyes of everyone, they thought he felt sorry for the death of the Zhu brothers. But Su Tong knew that what he regretted was that he could not kill the Zhu brothers with his own hands. Hey, he's dead now, so he can't be considered a hero. What's the pity? The government officials on the side curled their lips and said with disapproval, obviously not optimistic about the Zhu brothers and others. These people are all masters with some reputation in the world. There are also some people with top secret skills. Even if they are not Zhao Sisen's opponent, if they really have to run for their lives, they may not have no chance of survival. It's just that they died in a confused manner. After listening to Yang Gongjing's explanation, everyone understood the principles of the Ghost Sutra, so they couldn't help but feel that it was so simple. Naturally, there is some contempt for these people. But if you think about it from another person's perspective, if it were someone else who came here and was disturbed by the Ghost Sutra, they would probably die even worse than them. Su Tong couldn't help but remind himself that this place is still far away from the age of ending law, but the insidious and cunning murderous techniques in the age of ending law are probably even worse here. If he hadn't just raised his dark physique to the full level, he would probably be in bad luck. Yang Gongjing glanced at the corpses of these people and sighed, "Everyone, go on your way with peace of mind. Your names will be enshrined on the observatory by the Kintian prison, and a 5-year merit lamp will be lit for you." As he spoke, he took out the incense box from his pocket, took out 3 yellow incense sticks and stuck them on the ground. As soon as Yang Gongjing said these words, Su Tong clearly felt waves of fluctuations in the surrounding air, and took a look with the help of Minji and Kimin. A few vague outlines were vaguely visible on the ruins. Seeing this, Su Tong also took out a thick stack of guide money, walked on the ruins and started to scatter coins. Just like Bai Shui's guiding coins scattered in the air, Su Tong could clearly feel the weak power integrating into his body. This was Yinda. Yang Gongjing gave Su Tong a strange look, but didn't say anything, sighed and turned around to leave. Li 11 and others followed, originally calling Su Tong to leave together, but Su Tong had other plans and was waiting here. Probably waited for another stick of incense. The corpses were probably almost dug out, but Su Tong insisted that there was one corpse left and asked the officers to continue digging. It is winter now, and it is freezing cold in the mountains. The guards are covered in sweat from digging, and when the cool breeze blows, their bodies are bitingly cold. It was inevitable that I would begin to complain. But who is the official of the capital? If my own master can't afford to offend him, what can these little pawns do? While digging, a guard suddenly found something. He looked down and saw that it was a bloody palm. He was about to shout that he had found it. His eyes suddenly noticed that there was a big golden ring on this hand. Gold. The guard immediately shut his mouth, squatted down slowly, looked around to make sure no one was paying attention, then calmly reached down and grabbed the gold piece, just as he was about to break it off. His wrist tightened suddenly, as if he was caught by something. The officer's heart skipped a beat, and his heart began to beat. He hurriedly wanted to pull his hand out, but who knew that no matter how he pulled it out, the arm underneath was like an iron hoop. Instead of pulling it out, it became tighter and tighter. "Sandengji, what are you doing lying there?" When several officers behind him saw him lying motionless, they stepped forward to see what was going on. Santengza wanted to call for help, but was afraid that they would find the gold ring. In the struggle, he gritted his teeth and pulled hard a few times, only to feel something bite his hand, causing burning pain. But this time he felt the iron band on his wrist loosen, and he pulled his arm out with a strong tug. At the same time, he saw the big gold ring on his hand, and he quickly put it in his arms. "Here, here." Santengzi ignored the wounds on his hands and hurriedly turned around and shouted to his companions. The other officers rushed over to take a look, and sure enough they found the last body below. After several people worked together to dig through it, they lifted out the body. Su Tong came over and took a look. Yes, it was Monk Huiwen. The reason why he stayed was to find the body of Monk Huiwen, the half-step master. For this reason alone, the body was worth a lot of money. I walked up and took a closer look. After so many days, the body was not rotten at all. It was worthy of being a half-step master. "Sir, the bodies have been dug out. Should we burn them on the spot, or?" Sanbengza came forward and asked. Su Tong glanced at him and saw Santengza's eyes immediately dodge and look to the side. Seeing this, Su Tong couldn't help but be a little suspicious, wondering what was in this guy's eyes. He shook his head. "You go down the mountain, I will take care of the body." Ah! Everyone was stunned for a moment, wondering what the Lord was having. However, they were just small yamen servants, so they naturally didn't dare to ask any more questions, especially when Santengzi heard that he could leave. They agreed repeatedly and called the brothers to hurry down the mountain. "Wait." At this time, Su Tong suddenly shouted. Santengza's feet sank, and he turned around carefully. "Sir, is there anything else?" Seeing the guilty look on Sanbang's face, Su Tong couldn't help but look at this guy up and down, and looked at Kimin with his life-turning eyes. He saw that there was actually a murderous knife in the luck above Sanbang's head, which was disappearing and appearing in his heart. He knew that this guy must be hiding something from him. After thinking for a moment, he grinned and said, "Brothers, you have worked hard. Take this money and go down the mountain to find a place. Eat and drink well. Don't freeze your body." After saying that, he took out a banknote and threw it to Sanbangza. Santangza took it and took a look. "Oops, 100 taels." His eyes immediately went straight. With just this one banknote, they would never be able to earn so much money in half their lifetime. When several officers saw this, they even came forward, eager to kowtow to Su Tong. By the way, there are a lot of evil winds and evil spirits in the mountains. You have just been sweating profusely. It is a time when your body is weak and your energy is weak. Here are a few talismans. Take them with you and keep them carefully to ensure your safety. Su Tong took out a few more pieces of yellow paper. With a flick of his finger, the yellow paper turned into small triangular talismans and distributed them to everyone. Although it was just a small trick, in the eyes of these police officers, it was already an incredible magical power. They were shocked and thought to themselves, "No wonder he is a master from Kintian prison. He is really extraordinary." "Thank you, sir." Several people collected the talismans and immediately turned around and went down the mountain. Before leaving, Santangza did not forget to assure Su Tong that they knew nothing about the body. Anyone who asked, said that the body had been burned. Faced with Santangza's cleverness, Su Tong I said sternly, "No need, these people were ordered to do errands, and they died here. Based on the principle of never abandoning or giving up, I want to perform a ritual for them, that's all." "Yes, yes, yes." Santangza thought to himself, "You give me money, you are the uncle, whatever you say is true." After several of the guards had left, Su Tong released Jixiang and asked him to keep watch around, then turned around and started groping for the corpses. Since they are all traveling in the world, they must carry all the truly valuable treasures with them. After rummaging around, Su Tong found a pack of drugs called Mishazan on the Zhu brothers. When you look at the effect, it's not just a drug, it actually has an aphrodisiac effect. Take this thing away. Continuing to rummage, they found some hidden weapons on the bodies of the White Lotus cult members, all of which were ordinary goods. This made Su Tong secretly curse at what a bunch of poor people they were. However, he did find a book of simplified musical notation on Gu Zhenbei's body. 13 White Lotus swords. When I put it into the prop book, I saw that it was actually a skill book, but it was different from prop cards like close combat technique and 5 animal grappling hand. You only need to spend 30 script points on your own to learn it directly and master it. This thing is very cost effective, it does not take up space in the prop book, and can be mastered immediately. Compared with the cost, the mere 30 script points are almost negligible. No hesitation, just choose to study. After the sword manual turned into a white light and disappeared, a whole set of sword techniques immediately appeared in Su Tong's mind, as if a little person was practicing repeatedly in his mind and then integrated into his body. He casually picked up a long sword from the pile of stones, and after a few tentative moves, he found a swordsmanship that was smooth, with no flaws at all. Although the sword technique is simple and does not have any flashy moves, it should be the sword technique revised within the White Lotus section after several rounds of polishing. Each move pursues rapid and high explosive lethality. This can be regarded as making up for some shortcomings in my own progress. Keep touching the body. A spent bottle of golden gunpowder, throw it away in the trash. 2 hammers weighing 70 kilograms, throw away garbage. An iron sword, throw it away. Su Tong fumbled around, and finally it was the long-awaited monk Huiwen's turn. "Hey, master, I'm sorry, Looking at the body of monk Huiwen, Su Tong had been looking forward to it for a long time. It is absolutely impossible to say that there are no treasures in the half-step Grandmaster. However, what disappointed Su Tong was that this bald man didn't have any treasures at all. So poor? Are you worthy of being called a master? Why don't you agree that I, the Buddha, will not save the poor? Su Tong cursed in his heart, but he did not give up. He looked at the bald man and found that all the clothes on the monk were torn, but only the cassock was intact. Just take off the cassock and throw it into the prop book. Hey, it's really a treasure. Wachan cassock. Passive skill 1, Buddha's light protection. The wearer reduces physical damage by 15% and magic damage by 10%. Passive skill 2, invulnerable to water and fire. The wearer is immune to ordinary fire and water spell damage. Active skill 1, Dalodovajra mantra. It consumes 10 script points. After activation, the Dalodo scriptures on the cassock are activated, causing great visual damage to surrounding demons, evil spirits, and elves, causing them to be blinded for 3 minutes. This thing is not bad, but it seems very useless when it needs to be worn on the body. I don't believe in Buddhism, so wearing a cassock on the body looks nondescript. Keep it. Su Tong plans to give it to Gao Zhou after he returns. As for the corpse, except for a few that were smashed into disgrace, all the others were packed up and thrown into the prop book by Su Tong. After all, as promised, we must never leave. Headmaster, did the guard named San Bengza just steal something from us? Seeing Su Tong finish unpacking the box, Dia stepped forward and asked. In her eyes, no matter what San Bengza took, it all belonged to them. No rush, let's go back and take a look first. Su Tong was not in a hurry to settle the score with Santengza. Instead, he planned to observe it for a while. Santengza must have stolen something, but he still didn't know what exactly he stole that caused him to suffer such a bloody disaster. The amulet she just gave him was actually a folded paper man. No matter where the boy went tonight, he would be able to find traces of him. After returning to the Lianshan County Yamen, Yang Gongjing was already busy asking everyone to pack their luggage, and planned to set off early tomorrow morning. This time, she would not take the dry road, but the water route. Take a boat to Tianjin and then return directly to Beijing from Tianjin. Su Tong and the others had nothing to clean up, so they asked Huo Wuji and the others to stay while they went out shopping. Because during this period, Yang Gongjing temporarily replaced the magistrate of Lianshan County, recruited a new group of officers, and vigorously rectified the unhealthy tendencies in Lianshan County, so that during this period, the county was better than when they first arrived. On a lot. At least it's no longer like every house is shut up and lanterns are hung everywhere. But even so, looking around, the entire county still looks dilapidated. How dilapidated is it? Take any rural area near a fifth-tier city in reality and it will be more prosperous than this one. The group of officers who had just returned couldn't wait to take leave after paying their jobs, and went out to share the money and drink. Su Tong didn't follow him and found a hotel far away to sit down. There is nothing delicious to eat in this remote country, and the only dish to go with wine is a plate of peanuts. Still raw. As for the situation on TV where people drink heavily and eat meat in large bowls, I have never encountered it. As soon as I sat down, before I could call for work, I heard a curse coming from the side. Bah, what kind of wine is this in your house? Even horse urine tastes better than this. After saying that, a bang was heard, and the wine bottle was smashed to the ground. The man smashed the wine bottle, threw away a piece of silver, and was about to leave. Su Tong didn't have time to see the figure clearly. He just waited for the man to pass by, suddenly raised his nose, turned around and looked back. Headmaster! It's him! Ya screamed at the entrance of the hall, recognizing that the person just now was the mysterious master who had scared away Zhao Sisin before. Su Tong was shocked when he heard this. He looked back at the broken wine bottle on the ground. He suddenly thought of something, stood up and followed him. A figure dressed in white was walking swayingly on the street, smelling of alcohol, and everyone around him couldn't dodge him when he saw it. After the other party took a few steps, he glanced back sideways and said, "Why, you are not a girl. Why are you following me? To repay my kindness, I will send you to be reincarnated now, and wait until you come back in 18 years when you are beautiful. It's not too late to say yes." Su Tong laughed when he heard this, took out a rough ceramic bottle from the props book, and shook it in his hand. "My benefactor has great powers, so there is no need for me to repay my kindness. I just saw that my benefactor likes to drink, and I want him to have a taste. What does this wine taste like? Liquor." The other party turned around, looked sideways at Su Tong, stared at the wine bottle in his hand with a half smile, and said disdainfully, "You deserve to know about wine. The tea cakes are fragrant when chewed, and there are thousands of words in the cup of wine. They all say that tea drinkers should be smart and rich. This is nonsense. Little do they know that everything in the world cannot be done without wine, and what is happening on the tea table is conspiracy and transaction. That's what's going on at the wine table." Su Tong sincerely handed over the wine bottle in his hand. "I don't understand this wine, but it doesn't hinder it. Find someone who understands it." It seemed that he didn't expect that this young man could actually say such a thing. For a moment, the man couldn't help but look at him again, took the bottle and sneered, "I don't believe it." After saying that, he took off the cork of the wine, raised his head and drank it hard. As the wine went down his throat, the man's eyes widened for a while, and his face suddenly turned red. He stared at the bottle of wine in his hand in disbelief. "Does this wine have a name?" "Fire-burning knife." Su Tong looked at the man and said, "Fire shao knife? Good. Good name, good wine." After the man finished speaking, his eyes were bloodshot, and he stared at Su Tong and said, "There's more, let's have another bottle." Su Tong took out another bottle from the props book, but instead of giving it to the man directly, he said, "Tell me your name first, and I will give you this bottle of wine." Upon hearing this, the man's face suddenly turned cold, his eyes narrowed into a straight line, and Su Tong could feel that the airflow around him became sluggish. The man's eyes were like sharp knives pointed at him, making him feel like he was about to be split open. There is no doubt that this is the unique aura of the Grand Master. In an instant, Su Tong felt like he was breaking out in cold sweat. He believed that as long as the man in front of him moved his fingers, he might be killed. But at this moment, Su Tong became more calm than ordinary people. He raised the bottle and said, "If you don't tell me, I will throw it away. You are missing a bottle of good wine. At the worst, I will give you your life." "Ah!" The man seemed to be annoyed by Su Tong's stubbornness and laughed, snatching the bottle from his hand. "You brat, you have the guts. That old guy fell into trouble in your hands, it's really not a loss." After speaking, he looked at the bottle of wine in his hand. The man narrowed his eyelids and handed the wine to Su Tong. "If you drink it up, I will tell you my name." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 370. Looking at the wine bottle handed over by the man, Su Tong was stunned for a second. "No drink, bye. Turn around and leave without looking back. That thing, if I took a sip, I almost killed myself. After finishing the bottle in one gulp, how can I not think about it?" If he had a choice, he would rather have another fight with Zhao Sisson than this. He. You don't understand how to drink such a good wine. Looking at Su Tong's retreating back, the man smashed his mouth, picked up the bottle and took another sip. As the strong alcohol went down his throat, his face turned even redder, and tears flashed in his hazy eyes. I asked you how sad you can be. When you drink alcohol, you will become even more sad. Seemingly drunk but not drunk, half awake but not awake, the man staggered forward, shouting, "Good wine, good wine." When I came to a straw hut, I casually lay down in the corner and started snoring. After a while, the snoring came and went, as loud as thunder. In the liquor store, several servants were already drunk and unconscious. 100 taels of silver were divided among them, and each of them had more than a dozen taels. This money was a huge windfall for the servants in a small place like them. They could buy several acres of fertile land for their families when they returned home. And a bit rich, naturally couldn't help but drink more. It wasn't until the liquor store was about to close and the waiter woke them up that they remembered that they had to leave early tomorrow morning, and then they walked out grumbling. The master from the capital is the real master. The master of our family is the grandson. No, for 100 taels of silver, our master's annual salary is only 28 taels, which is as much as our master's salary for 4 years. After listening to some of his companions complaining about his master, Santangza just laughed and said, "You guys go first, I'll go take a pee. You have a lot to do. Go quickly, we are waiting for you here." The companion waved his hand impatiently, signaling Santangza to go back quickly. There are still public toilets and latrines these days, but at this point in the evening, usually no one goes there. Why? On the one hand, it's dark, so dark inside that you can't see clearly. On the other hand, it is unsafe. Most of the latrines are elevated with bamboo boards, and underneath is a large water tank. If someone slips in the middle of the night and falls in, it will be really unlucky. Unlucky mother opened the door, unlucky enough to get home. Santangza randomly found a corner, took off his pants, and was about to pee, when he felt someone walking around him, and Santangza didn't care. Out of the basic etiquette of men peeing, I instinctively moved a few steps to the side. Crash. Santangza took a look and said, "Well, I've been a little angry recently." He squinted his eyes and looked sideways. "Okay, the blood is coming out in the urine. This is kidney failure." He was also drunk and had a bad heart. He looked at the blood dripping down, without thinking much, he just picked up his pants and left. "Why?" the shadow next to him shouted. Santangza suddenly pricked up his ears when he heard him being called from behind, only to hear the shadow behind him continue, "You have lost your gold." As soon as he heard the words gold dropped, Santangza stared, "Mine." When he said this, he turned around suddenly. In the time it took for him to turn around, Jinzi didn't see him, and his eyes tightened. Santangza's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen anyone with such a big head in his life. It was as big as a basin, dark, with no eyes or nose visible, only a small cherry mouth showing, grinning at him. Hey, it's mine now." As soon as these words came out, Santangza suddenly felt like the world was spinning. His body, which had just drank wine, was so cold that all the muscles in his body were tense. He leaned back and lay on the ground with a thud. The 3-bounce man was lying on the ground, his eyes were spinning, and he couldn't move a finger. This feeling is the same as when people encounter ghosts on the bed. But at this moment, he had his eyes open, watching the shadow slowly squat down, his hands along his arms, trying to stick to his body, and what was even weirder was that the shadow's body pressed against him, and he seemed to be entering. It's like blending into his body. Soon, his arms, legs, and even his good brother could no longer be felt. Seeing this face getting closer and closer, Santangza's heart almost jumped out of his chest. Although he is just an ordinary servant, he can still feel the footsteps of death approaching him. His lips began to tremble and his breathing became rapid. He didn't know what was happening, but his strong intuition told him that when the shadow gradually became completely attached to him, there would be no more Sanbengzi in the world, and everything about him would be erased. With intense fear and discomfort after drinking, Santengzi opened his mouth and vomited. The wine was mixed with some vegetable leaves, evaporating in the air with a lethality comparable to canned herrings. Shadow paused and raised his head as if in disgust. But he knew that if he continued to hesitate, he would be unable to stop talking after Sanbengzi vomited a few more times. If you don't seize the opportunity to seize the opportunity, you will never be able to turn over. Thinking of this, Shadow's heart became cruel and he buried his head and pressed against Sanbengzi's head. Ding! 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 Just when the shadow was only a centimeter away from Santengzi's face, a faint sound of bells suddenly sounded. The sound of the bell in the sky was like a thunderbolt exploding on the shadow, making him tremble all over, followed by a sneer from behind, "Fix the sky mirror, set it for me." When a mirror shines down, the shadow is like a three-bouncer, unable to move a finger. "Who is it?" Shadow screamed, twisting his neck as much as possible and looking to the side, but because of the angle, he could only see a pair of boots. "Let me just say, it would be a pity for you to die like this, a half-step master after all." "Master, long time no see." Su Tong knelt down and looked up and down with squinted eyes. The shadow's face was blurry, but it still maintained the outline of Monk Huiwen. Just when he saw Su Tong, Monk Huiwen's mood suddenly reached the bottom. Especially when he was stared at by his eyes and his playful expression, Huiwen felt like he was being caught and raped in bed. In fact, Su Tong was hiding in the corner and had been watching for a while. He didn't notice Huiwen at first, but he didn't realize what was going on until the monk Huiwen called Sanbengzi and Sanbengzi turned his head suddenly. The older generation often say that when you walk at night, you should never look back. This sentence is not unreasonable. Metaphysically speaking, there are 3 fires on a person's shoulders. If you turn around suddenly, the fire will be extinguished. Without one fire, you will not be full of energy and will easily attract monsters. The scientific explanation is that human beings have an innate fear of their own backs. In the middle of the night, you look back from time to time, and the more you look, the more scared you become. In the end, you scare yourself and make you sick. But whether it's science or metaphysics, don't always look back in the middle of the night. What are you going to do? Monk Huiwen had long noticed that Su Tong was not a simple person, but he didn't want to fall into his hands one day. Justice. You, Monk Huiwen was stunned for a few seconds. If others said this, it was okay, but when it came from the mouth of Ma Hongwen, who had done all kinds of evil, where was his shame? He reached out and aimed at the top of Monk Huiwen's head and grabbed it violently. At the same time, he activated the soul-arresting technique. Monk Huiwen, even though he was a half-step master, was unable to resist at this moment. If you want to say that he may not be a match against living people, but if you want to say that against dead ghosts, that is a professional counterpart. Holding Monk Huiwen's soul in his hands, Su Tong threw it into the furnace at the entrance of the hall regardless of his begging. I don't know what the soul of a half-step master can refine. Without the interference of Monk Huiwen, Santengzi, who was lying on the ground, finally felt lighter and regained his ability to move. At this time, Su Tong noticed that his proficiency in Kimen had actually increased by 70 points. I don't know if this much proficiency is because I changed the ending of Santengzi, or because I changed the ending of Monk Huiwen. Not only that, in addition to increasing his proficiency in Kimen, Su Tong also keenly felt a strong yin virtue integrated into his body. There are not a few of these evil virtues. After thinking about it for a moment, it should be related to Monk Huiwen. I remember Zhao Cixin once said that Monk Huiwen is a remnant of an evil sect and has practiced some evil skills. Since he can practice to a half-step master, it is probably harmful. Many people died, and killing him was an act of justice for heaven. Thank you, master, thank you, master. Santengza got up from the ground and knelt down in front of Su Tong. After walking through the Hell Gate and returning, Santengza suddenly woke up from the alcohol. Su Tong was not allowed to speak, so he took out the big gold ring that slipped from Monk Huiwen's finger. Master, I got this unexpectedly. Please don't despise it. I can treat it as a way to repay your kindness today. Su Tong took it and took a look. The big golden ring was engraved with a lion's head. Not only was the lion made lifelike, but even the ruby in the lion's mouth gave people an evil light in the night. Good stuff, I don't want it from you in vain. I'll give you another 100 taels. Go back and have a good rest. Santengza wanted to refuse, but after taking a look at the 100 taels of silver, he swallowed his polite words and took the banknote in his hand with thanks. After sending Sanbengzi away, Su Tong threw the ring into the props book. There was a question mark entry for the ring in the props book. Obviously, this thing needed to be returned to reality for appraisal. At this time, Dia was lying in front of the hall and shouted to Su Tong, "Headmaster! Come on, open the door and let the treasure out." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 371. As soon as it got dark the next day, Yang Gongjing took Su Tong and others and set off in disguise. Qin Tianjian keeps a low profile and will never reveal his identity easily outside unless necessary. On the one hand, this is to facilitate their secret investigation. On the other hand, it is also because of Qin Tianjian's special status that he will attract many idle people. For example, a certain feudal official knows that someone from Qin Tianjian is coming, and he has to drag you to do a fortune-telling. If you don't count, he won't give you face. If your fortune is not good, he won't let you go. Even if Qin Tianjian is a 6th grade Beijing official, he can't help himself if he encounters these stupid guys. Or, maybe you met some Green Forest hero, like the White Lotus section when they heard that you were Qin Tianjian. They didn't come to chop off your head as a sacrifice to the flag. Therefore, it is most convenient to keep a low profile. The group of people came to the ferry by the river and saw some merchant ships docked at the ferry. Seeing them and a group of strangers coming to the ferry, the guys on the ferry couldn't help but look at each other and began to look at these people. A middle-aged man who looked like a steward walked up, cupped his hands towards everyone and said, "Are you guys going to take a boat?" Li 11 stepped forward and said, "Take a boat to wash your face. There won't be any old friends on the line who want to take advantage of the money." What Li 11 was talking about was a slang term in Jianghu. The so-called washing one's face in Jianghu usually means going home. On the line refers to an area or a road. Those who make money off the money are water thieves. When walking in the world, talking in black and white is completely different. Simply put, it's the difference between an insider and an outsider. Hearing this, the steward couldn't help but raise his head and glance at Li 11 again, then glanced at Su Tong and others, and said with a smile, "We are all working together, and there are always people on the line, so I guarantee there will be no problem. We are all friends, and there will be people taking care of us online, so there will never be any problems." The steward assured them repeatedly and invited them to board a larger merchant ship. After getting on the boat, Li 11 asked the boatman accompanying him to prepare some food and drinks. During this time, he was tired of cooking chicken, so he could change his appetite with 2 good river fresh food. Su Tong had no appetite for river food, so he just found a place to lie down, called out the props book, and looked at the shining golden pill in the props book. King Kong Ming Wang Dan. Those who eat it will be blessed with special powers and possess the body of Vajra. King Kong body, all attributes increased by 30%, physical damage reduced by 55%, magic resistance reduced by 60%. Obtain exclusive skills and protect the law of the Ming dynasty. Daming King Dharma Protector, it consumes 200 script points of yourself. After activation, you can call the Daming King Vajra Dharma Protector. Duration, 15 minutes. Cooling time, 30 days. Note, the requirements for the consumption of this product are very high. The eater must not have other bloodlines, inheritance blessings, or reach a very high level of Buddhist classic knowledge. After taking a look, Su Tong couldn't help but sigh. This thing was made by throwing Monk Huiwen into the alchemy furnace last night. After seeing it, Da Yat and the others were immediately disappointed. Their happiness was in vain. Is this something bad? No, it's very good. It's simply the best of the best, worthy of the title of half-step Grand Master. The problem is, this thing has user requirements. Which one is easier to say? With the formless power, you can completely ignore any conflicts in the training system. But later you need to have extremely high attainments in Buddhism. Just this one item basically put an end to Su Tong's desire to eat it. If you want to talk about some Taoist scriptures, he can still have the patience to study them, but Buddhist, he has no intention of becoming a monk. However, this thing is a good treasure. Although I can't eat it, phaseless power has the effect of transforming the system, so this thing can be used as a primer for myself. If we meet this guy Zhao Sisson again, he might be able to come in handy. Mentioning Zhao Sisson, Su Tong couldn't help but start muttering in his heart. This guy must have been seriously injured, but after so long, he must have almost recovered from his injuries. There is always no one way to protect yourself day and night. You always have to think of a way to kill this guy to make people feel relieved. But this involves another question: who is this person? What is your identity? He didn't believe the nonsense that Zhao Sisson would really be a student of the new school. Su Tong was thinking deeply when he saw another group of people stepping onto the boat. These people were dressed in uniform clothes and all had tools in their hands. The person walking in front was pushing a wheelbarrow with a big flag on it with the word Hongui written on it. Every few steps he took, he raised the gong in his hand and struck it hard several times. The word Hongui was shouted out. Even after getting on the boat, it was still like this. Escort agency. Su Tong raised his eyelids, and there was something in the Qingyun Yishulu that Mr. Song gave him. It was mentioned above that there are 3 types of escorts. One is the mighty dart, the other is the benevolent dart and the stealing dart. The mighty escort was like this in front of him, holding flags and beating gongs and drums, as if he was afraid that others would not know he was coming along the way. Unless your strength and background are strong enough, you would never dare to do this. If you were someone with less strength, you might not be able to go very far if you use the mighty dart, and you would be robbed. As for Renai escorts, they are quiet, unpretentious, and low-key escorts, but the flag must not be turned down. They mostly follow fixed routes, and the relationships along the way are clearly managed. As for the last kind of stealing darts, it is the most exciting. Generally speaking, if the escort is stolen, it means that the content and information of the escort have been leaked. And the matter is so important that we can no longer leave in the open, we can only try our best to do it secretly. Generally, the escort agency will arrange 2 separate lines, one light and one dark, or even several separate lines. This kind of escort is often a narrow escape, and no escort agency dares to accept it easily. After a group of escorts stepped onto the boat in front of them, a large box was carried behind them. The leading bodyguard walked onto the boat, glanced at Su Tong sitting on the deck, frowned, and raised his hand towards Su Tong. Su Tong nodded, and glanced at the box through the eye of life Kimen without leaving any trace. As a result, I saw that the box was completely dark, and I didn't know what was inside. What's even weirder is that since this group of people got on the boat, signs of the bloody disaster have vaguely appeared above everyone's head. There's something wrong with this box. He didn't know what was in the box, but he was certain that since this group of people got on the ship, everyone's fate had changed dramatically, and the root of the problem lay in that box. This made him curious about what was in the box. Wait for me. Just as the boat was about to leave, a man from a distance caught up with him. After jumping on the boat, he patted his chest and said, "Finally we caught up." The martial artists standing on the deck of the ship looked at each other and saw that he was out of breath and dressed as a scholar, so they said nothing more. The boss of the ship came over, but before he could speak, the other party threw out a bag of silver. "Help me, I have a letter from home. My mother is seriously ill and has missed the ship. I don't know how long I have to wait." The boss of the ship did not say anything. He first waited with his hands. He felt that this bag of money was less than 10 taels, and his face suddenly brightened with a smile. "The officer must not move around at night, otherwise I can't bear the responsibility if something goes wrong. Don't worry, don't worry. I will study during the day and sleep at night. I will never move around." The scholar repeatedly waved his hands in assurance. After hearing this, the boss of the ship glanced at the old master of the escort agency not far away. After seeing the old master nodding his head without any trace, he asked someone to prepare a room. "Hey, isn't this inviting a thief into the house?" Dia lay on the entrance of the hall and said with a smile. Su Tong raised his head and glanced at her. "Not necessarily. This scholar, no. Should be this young lady. She is by no means a fuel-efficient lamp," but Su Tong soon discovered that this young lady did not seem to be the source of the problem. After she boarded the ship, her fate changed like everyone else's. In addition to himself, there are also masters such as Huo Wuji, plus these bodyguards. If he is an ordinary water thief, he will only seek death. Could it be Zhao Sisson? Thinking of this, Su Tong couldn't help but feel wary. However, his caution was dispelled as soon as the ship set sail. Main Mission 1, leaving Beijing, completed. The prompt in the prop booklet sounded, indicating that his main mission had been completed. Su Tong finally breathed a sigh of relief. After all, without Yang Gongjing as a super dragster, even if Zhao Sisson came to visit him again, he could at least escape. Without this burden, Su Tong immediately relaxed. After watching the scenery on the deck for a while, he got up and went back to the cabin to rest. When they fell asleep with squinted eyes until midnight, Huo Wuji and several people in the cabin opened their eyelids. They are all masters in the martial arts world. When they are asleep, they will wake up immediately if there is any slight disturbance outside. Su Tong continued to sleep with his eyes closed, with no intention of getting up. After a while, the sound of fighting came from outside, and Huo Wuji and others could no longer sit still. They all went out to see what happened. Su Tong originally wanted to sleep for a while, but the noise outside became louder and louder. It wasn't until Yang Gongjing woke up that Su Tong walked out of the cabin. As soon as he walked out of the cabin door, a corpse fell in front of him. Huo Wuji looked back and said with a grin on his honest face, "They are just a few little thieves? Brother Ma, please don't move and let us take care of them." Although these thieves obviously did not come for them, how could Huo Wuji miss such a good opportunity? Naturally, he wanted to perform well in front of Su Tong, show his strength and find a good future for himself. "Okay, I'll leave it to you then." Since Huo Wuji liked performing so much, Su Tong was naturally happy and followed Huo Wuji to the deck. Several masked men blocking the way saw Huo Wuji raising his knife and slashed at him. These people are obviously well trained, and they hit the target right away. But they were no match for Huo Wuji. Huo Wuji's face turned cold, and he rushed forward with his feet. When he raised his hand, a ball of blazing flame suddenly burst out from his palm. Not only did the two men's swords melt into molten iron, but the people also and turned into a torch. This made Su Tong's eyes brighten up. He was also a person who played with fire. Seeing Huo Wuji's methods, he felt a little itchy in his heart. However, before he could take a few more glances, a sneaky shadow appeared in front of him. In sight. The sneaky figure was like an inconspicuous loach among the crowd on the deck, and it made its way into the escort room. Su Tong narrowed his eyes and followed him calmly. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 372. The fighting on the deck became more and more fierce, and the two knife-wielding escorts in the guest room did not know what was going on outside. They blew out the candles and closed the doors and windows. Once someone breaks in from the outside, they can't see anything in the dark, but the two of them can use the light when the door opens to strike first and kill the incoming person with a knife. The plan was perfect, but both men overlooked one thing. The locked doors and windows were airtight, and the dark environment prevented them from seeing the details in the room clearly. I don't know when, but a faint fragrance began to pour into the room, and the fragrance became stronger and stronger. By the time the two escorts realized that something was wrong, their heads were already dizzy and they fell to the ground with a thud. After a while, a golden thread as thin as hair poked out from the crack of the door, pulled through the crack, and easily pulled up the door pin. Buzz. The door was pushed open. The two escorts on the ground were already making deafening snoring sounds. "Hey, you two idiots, just sleep peacefully." The girl walked into the room with her mouth and nose covered. He casually picked up the kettle that had fallen on the ground and placed it on the table, not forgetting to arrange the teacups neatly as well. Then she walked to the big box in the corner. She had been eyeing such a big box early in the morning. If someone hadn't suddenly come to rob the escort, she wouldn't have had the chance to do it. I don't know who of the group of people outside can win, and I don't know how long they can fight. In short, I have to seize the time and take away the treasures inside as soon as possible. The box is locked, and it's not an ordinary copper lock. This lock is called Jiku King Kong. It has 3 keyholes and 3 keys. The keys are in the hands of 3 people. If you want to open the lock, 3 people need to twist the keys at the same time. Even one slow step cannot open it. The lock is made of thick fine iron, and the head of the lock alone weighs almost 7 or 8 kilograms. If you want to use something to break it open, you may not be able to open it until dawn. So when most people see this lock, they just leave without spending any time. But when the girl took a closer look, she immediately became happy. A laughter like silver bells came from his mouth. Have these reckless men trained their muscles into their brains? The girl stood up, looked at the lock, raised her foot and kicked it. 1 foot, 2 feet. Bang, the lock was destroyed. No, the lock of the box was kicked off. Without the latch, no matter how strong the lock is, it will be useless. Without the lock, the girl wanted to open the box, but when her hand touched the box, she seemed to remember something. She turned over, jumped up with her waist high, and stepped on the walls on both sides of the box with her feet spread apart. On the top, a man is hanging in mid-air and bending down to open a box. Why is the posture so strange? I'm afraid that there is a mechanism in the box, and if someone who doesn't understand opens the box rashly, if they open the muzzle of a black hole inside, or if a few crossbow arrows are shot out, they won't be able to hide in time. The girl gently opened the box with both hands, only to hear a rattling sound inside the box. The girl's brows moved slightly and she pulled hard. Puff puff. I didn't see clearly what it was, but the wall in front of me was already beaten into a hornet's nest. When the girl saw this, sweat dropped from her forehead. Mom. It's a shame that I remembered it. If I couldn't remember it, I would die here today. He jumped down, narrowed his eyes into a crescent moon, and looked into the box. The smile on the girl's face suddenly began to stiffen little by little. Are these people sick? All I saw was a dark mass in the box. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a corpse. The body was curled up and it was unknown how long it had been hidden in the box, but the strange thing was that the body did not have a bad smell. But you can still see the deteriorated corpse spots and rotting flesh. After all this effort, it turned out to be a corpse. It was really unlucky. She frowned, cursed, and tried to close the box, then took the opportunity to sneak away. Press your palms on the box and push it down hard. Bang, the box wasn't closed. The girl glanced doubtfully, stood up, turned around, and was about to leave. But after taking 2 steps, she turned back and glanced at the half-open seam of the box, and the twisted feeling in her heart began to take hold. Anyway, the fighting was still fierce outside, so I still had some time. When she thought of this, she walked back, lifted the lid of the box, used all her strength, and then buckled it down. Boom! This time the box made a louder noise, but the box never closed. Why couldn't it close? The girl's heart skipped a beat and she lowered her head to look at the box. Only then could it be seen clearly that one of the hands of the corpse was somehow stuck in the box. Huh, scared me. Seeing clearly that her hand was stuck on the box, the girl knelt down and looked at the escort's knife, wanting to take the hand back. She reached out and picked up the knife, but just when her hand was about to grasp the handle of the knife, the girl suddenly looked into the box. The delicate face gradually turned pale, the whole body was trembling, the mouth was half opened, and the body suddenly froze in place. In the dark box, 2 pairs of eyes stared straight at her. I saw the hand that was sewing the box slowly twisting, and making a clicking sound of the bones rubbing together. The sound of bones rubbing against each other came from the box, which sounded a bit like popcorn in a hot pot. She is a well-known thief in the world. She once sneaked into the palace and stole the princess's most beloved jade ruyi. She has never been inside except the Forbidden Palace. What scene has she not seen? I have also heard all kinds of mysterious and strange rumors in the world. But I have never seen the dead resurrected and crawling out of the box. She wanted to run. But his legs were shaking uncontrollably, as if he had lost all consciousness, when he looked at the gap in the box getting wider and wider. The girl's cheeks were numb, and she even felt unable to breathe freely. I don't want to die, I want to live. She opened her mouth wide and wanted to shout, but the sound could only come out as a low growl from her throat, without saying a single word clearly. Kaka kaka. The box was slowly pushed open, and the corpse stood up. The rotting face was a little dazed at first, and then looked at his palms, as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he realized that he was dead. Ah! Ah! The corpse tried to shout twice, and after finding that it seemed to be able to speak normally, a stiff smile suddenly appeared on the rotten face. Ha ha, freedom! As soon as he finished speaking, a person suddenly walked in from the door. Before the body could see who it was, the other person's fist had already hit his face, and the strong and powerful fist was like a hammer hitting his face. You could even see a flying tooth flashing past his eyes, followed by an open fist and a twist on his shoulder. Crack! The arm that felt no pain instantly became soft. The person who came didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. He leaned forward, threw him over his shoulder, and threw him to the ground. When the corpse came back to consciousness, its posture was twisted into a mess. Then he watched helplessly as he was lifted up and thrown into the box again. Bang, the box was closed again. I didn't see clearly what happened from beginning to end. I only heard a man's voice outside the box, obviously, no. Looking at the box that was covered again, the girl who was slumped on the ground finally recovered from her fear. He raised his head with difficulty and looked at the man in front of him. In the dark night, his face could not be seen at all, only his twinkling eyes revealed a heart-catching light. Thief. Su Tong sat on the box and looked down at the woman's face. The look on top of the woman's head changed after she appeared. It was now misty. It was hard to say whether it was good or bad, but it was much better than the luck she had just faced when she was about to die. I also gained 10 points of proficiency in Chi Men. Although it's not much, it can add up to a tower. But this also reminded me that I must think of a way to improve Kimon's ability when I return. Maybe it was the aftermath of the disaster, or maybe it was the intense fear that made the woman's head a little sluggish. After hearing Su Tong's question, she actually nodded numbly. "That's good, come with me." Su Tong lifted the box on his shoulder. This corpse was very strange. It was obviously dead, but it still retained its consciousness. It didn't look like it was a zombie. If it wasn't a zombie, what would it be? But there are specialties in the art, and if I don't understand it myself, I can take it back to Gaozhou to study it carefully. The girl was still at a loss in her mind. Seeing Su Tong leave, she followed behind with a blank expression. The two walked to the deck and saw that the deck was covered in blood. Maybe those who robbed the escort never expected that in addition to the people from the escort agency, there would be another group of masters on this boat. Especially Huo Wuji, in order to show off the performance of Su Tong, the horse master. Killing people is like chopping melons and vegetables. A blazing fire rolled up between his palms, which looked very similar to his own skill extreme flame turbine, but the only difference was that Huo Wuji's was more domineering and fierce. This reminded him of what Jian Hand once said: Huo Wuji seems to be cultivating a kind of Hunyuan fire. Although it is strong, it is not orthodox. I wonder what effect it will have if I combine it with my own magic flame and corrosive fire? Thinking of this, Su Tong's gaze towards Huo Wuji gradually became eager. In just a short while, Huo Wuji had already killed everyone around him. Seeing Su Tong coming out, Huo Wuji grinned and asked, "Brother Ma, what do you think of my Hunyuan fire?" Su Tong nodded and gave him a thumbs up. "Hit." Huo Wuji grinned and raised his chin towards the other two brothers, showing a bit of pride. When Qian Shu and Bai Shitong saw this, they immediately worked harder, fearing that they would lose their price in front of Brother Ma. Now Thousand Hands does not have the weird and changeable strength in the previous script, and its strength is not as strong as Huo Wuji, but it is easy to kill these bandits. In comparison, Know-It-All is a little inferior, but this guy seems to be proficient in divination. Every step he takes is in the most clever place. The blades that fall around him seem to be chopped out of thin air. On the contrary, he seems to be casual. He raised his hand and struck the sword, and the opponent hit him straight on the blade as if he had bumped into him. Su Tong stood aside and watched with joy, almost flying with joy. If he guessed correctly, Bai Shitong would be the boss of Feng Lelu in the future, and he would be proficient in the art of divination. Thinking of the many things Feng Lelu had done to him, the smile on Su Tong's face became friendly. These robbers were really unable to fight, and they did not dare to continue fighting. They whistled, called to the remaining robbers, turned around and jumped into the water. Seeing the robbers leaving, the escorts on the ship breathed a sigh of relief. The leading bodyguard put down the knife in his hand, walked to Huo Wuji and others, cupped his hands and said, "Thank you heroes for your help, please accept my bow." Seeing this, Huo Wuji and others hurriedly moved away to make way for Su Tong. After all, the leader is behind, how can they steal the limelight from the leader? Upon seeing this, the old guard knew that he had worshipped the wrong person, and immediately bowed to Su Tong again. Su Tong glanced at them and found that the bloody disaster on the heads of these bodyguards had not dissipated. After thinking about it in his heart, he felt relieved. "Go to rest early and don't disturb me again." He waved his hands with a cold face, ignored the old escort, turned around and pulled the woman behind him to leave. As for the box, he naturally threw it into the prop book. The life and death of these people has nothing to do with him. Moreover, even if he returns the box to them, they may not survive. After all, the contents in the box are too bizarre. If they find that the thing they are escorting is a living corpse, I am afraid that their employer will also won't let them live. Not long after returning to the room, the boat was indeed in a mess, and the escorts seemed to have started arguing. The girl was pulled by Su Tong's arm. Faced with the fierce group of men in the room, the girl was so frightened that she did not dare to say a word. Yang Gongjing just frowned and thought it was Master Ma's habit that had come out. But he didn't say anything. At dawn the next day, the escorts found a place to get off the boat and lost the dart. They guessed that the group of robbers might have stolen it during the chaos, and planned to go back and find a way to get the dart back. Before leaving, Bai Shitong also gave them a divination. "It's very bad, so I'll sign the lottery." Su Tong stood aside and counted with plum blossoms, and also gave them a divination. Strangely, his divination turned out to be a good fortune. I don't know why, but the results of their hexagrams are completely opposite, and I don't know who made the wrong calculation. But so what if the calculation is wrong? After all, in this era when human life is as cheap as grass, who cares about the lives of some escorts? Everyone took a boat and went straight to Tianjin, and did not stop after changing to a boat. It took about 5 days to finally return to the capital. As soon as he returned to the capital, Su Tong immediately asked for leave and went home without even saying hello to the Ministry of War. But in the eyes of everyone, this seems to be the most normal thing. After all, it is abnormal for the eldest son of the March family to go to work every day. Li 11 was not so lucky. She still had to report back to the palace. She didn't even have a chance to take a vacation and went to work as usual the next day. Before leaving, Li 11 glanced at his good brothers with a resentful look. If he said he was not envious, he would be lying. The group has not reached the door of the house yet. I saw a group of officers pulling a donkey cart coming from a distance. When everyone saw the car, they immediately stayed away, for fear of getting into any bad luck. I saw corpses piled up into a hill on the cart, and blood spilled out from the cracks in the cart, leaving a long trail of blood on the street. Hey, it's so miserable. The onlookers all sighed when they saw this. An uninformed person asked what happened, only to hear the other person say, "You don't know, last night, the Hong family boxing gym behind Dashilan was massacred." Sorry, I'm stuck today. Let me update first and let me sort out the plot. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 373. Zhou Quan. Where is the man? Zhou Quan. Zhou Quan, you little bastard, I asked you to fill the water tank, but you forgot to remember to eat and not take food. Bang. The door of the woodshed was kicked open, and the housekeeper walked in with a dark face. He lifted up the quilt and saw that there was no one on the bed. Hey, little brat. Seeing that Zhou Quan was not in the room, the steward was stunned for a moment. This kid didn't sleep in the middle of the night. Where did he go? In doubt, the steward suddenly remembered something, turned around, walked out of the woodshed, and walked toward the backyard along the inconspicuous corner path. Walked to a courtyard at the end of the martial arts hall. The yard was pitch dark. Judging from the dilapidated state of the doors and windows, it could be seen that the yard had been abandoned for a long time. The steward glanced at the opened courtyard door, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Those triangular eyes suddenly became sharp. He saw a pile of firewood from the corner of his eye and stepped forward to pick up a stick. The stick was made of solid wood, and its heavy weight made the steward's anger intensify in vain. Okay, Zhou Quan, if you don't take the road to heaven, there is no way to hell to break in. You are seeking death on your own, but no wonder I am so cruel. The steward took a deep breath and muttered to himself. I quietly opened the door and saw that the room was empty, with not a single piece of furniture in it. The steward stretched out his hand and pulled it on the ground. Ka. A secret door actually rose up from the ground. When you look at the fire below, you can still vaguely hear the sound of boxing practice. The steward sneered when he saw this. This was a dungeon built privately by the martial arts school. The people imprisoned in it were the traders of the martial arts school. The person responsible for delivering food to the traders during this period was Zhou Quan. So seeing that Zhou Quan was not in the room, the steward thought about it and concluded that this boy was probably in this place. He practiced boxing in private and colluded with traders. Even if he beat people to death, he couldn't be blamed. Thinking of the steward, he crept down and stood in the corner, tilting his head and looking inside. Under the dim light, an old man and a young man. The old man sat cross-legged on the straw mat, his shoulders were locked with lute bones, his hair was disheveled, his face was covered with mud, but his eyes were bright and bright. An own goal. Upon hearing this, the young man took a big step forward with his left foot, bent his left leg into a half squat, straightened his right leg to form a left lunge, turned his body to the left, straightened his right arm and swung it to the left, and then opened his fists left and right, making a sound. Sound. Good. Seeing this, the old man slapped his thigh, Zai Wu Bang, Da Hong Bang, turning 3 unique palms. Upon hearing this, the young man's moves changed, his hands were like hammers, he stepped forward, jumped up at the waist, turned around and punched 3 more times in the air. The steward, who was secretly standing in the corner watching, his eyes widened at this time. There was a sudden storm in my heart. He has been in charge of the boxing gym for so many years. It is impossible to say that he does not have some real kung fu in his hands, but it is not possible to say how good his kung fu is. But the eyesight is always the same. Zhou Quan did this without blushing or out of breath, and he was as precise as any boxer who had been practicing in the martial arts hall for several years. This kid can really practice martial arts. The steward lowered his head and thought, it's impossible. This guy's bones are very weak, and he eats so poorly every day. He doesn't have a few drops of oil and water for a month. How can he have the energy to practice martial arts? The so-called poor in literature and rich in military affairs. This is the unchanging truth from ancient times to the present. If you can't eat meat, and you don't have the help of secret medicines to build muscles and bones, you won't be able to pass this level. There are quite a few people who fail to master Kung Fu in the end and become crippled by the training. In fact, let alone ancient times, it is the same in modern times. Shooting is not allowed in China, but rich people can go abroad for fun. A bullet costs 2,000 yuan, and they can also take you hunting. This is something that poor people cannot afford. Okay. The old man watched Zhou Quan finish a set of punches, patted his thigh and said, the last move is just the center cannon. If you let me out, I will pass it on to you. When Zhou Quan heard the words and was about to say something, his ears twitched and he noticed the sound of breaking wind behind him, so he hurriedly stepped aside. After seeing the steward's face clearly from the corner of his eye, his heart moved. He grabbed his hands back and used a move from Hong Fist to hold the moon in his arms. But the steward did not hide. Instead, he rushed forward and hit Zhou Quan's face with his elbow. Zhou Quan unconsciously leaned back, but at the same time he kicked the steward in the face. Hee, you're still a beginner after all, and it's really hard for you to practice for a few more years. The steward wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, suddenly raised his left foot, and kicked Zhou Quan's lower abdomen with a swallow, and then a sharp whip leg made a harsh whistling sound in the air. Seeing this, Zhou Quan quickly raised his hands to parry, and the thin boy was kicked back repeatedly. Don't you want to learn the gravity cannon? I'll teach you. Seeing Zhou Quan lose his center of gravity, the steward's eyes showed a cold light. He stepped forward with his left foot, raised his hand and grabbed Zhou Quan's wrist, rotated his waist internally, and drew back his other fist. See clearly, the shoulders and legs are in line, the waist is like a bow, the punch can't be fully discharged, and the strength can penetrate the mountain. The manager was sure of victory, and without hesitation, he struck Zhou Quan directly in the chest with a sideways fist from his shoulder belt and waist. This punch was very powerful. I am not very good at it and have slacked off a lot over the years, but I can still kill a child with one punch. Only. Is he really a child? Boom. The fist hit Gao Zhou's chest, and Gao Zhou's body trembled slightly. He raised his head and looked at the steward quietly with his eyes. You. The steward was startled, looking at those clear black and white eyes, which were cold, dull, and without even a trace of human emotion. He suddenly panicked. Those eyes were not what a child should have. Even the old owner has never had such a terrifying look. He was afraid. You little bastard. As he spoke, he twisted hard, and the palm that was holding Gao Zhou's wrist suddenly twisted downwards. But at this moment, the thin palm turned out to be like a diamond. When he broke it with force, the palm did not move at all. Thank you, my mission is accomplished. A smile gradually appeared on Gao Zhou's face, and his fingers slowly came together. This process was very slow, and the steward was still struggling at first, but soon found that he couldn't even pull his hand out. This is not the strength that a person should have at all. You. What on earth are you? What frightened him even more was that his fingers had begun to hurt slightly, and in front of him, Zhou Quan, whom he was familiar with, was always looking at him expressionlessly. Let go. Let go. The intense fear and pain on his fingers made the steward even more crazy, but no matter whether he hit him with his fists or kicked him, Zhou Quan in front of him didn't even move his eyebrows. Seeing this, the steward picked up the stick in his hand, rounded it up and hit Gao Zhou on the head. Bang 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 bang. I don't know how many times he hit it. Gao Zhou's forehead was covered with sawdust, but other than that, there were no wounds left. His fingers were still slowly moving closer. Click. The sound of bones breaking caused the steward's body to tremble violently, and he let out painful wails and calls for help. Unfortunately, when this cell was first built, it was thought that it might disturb the neighbors. Therefore, in order to ensure the sleep quality of the neighbors, thick stone slabs were installed on the surrounding walls. Not to mention his screams, even if he danced in the square here, there would never be any sound outside. Ah! Zhou Quan, I was wrong, let go. The pain in his fingers made the steward kneel on the ground, begging loudly. But the person in front of him was not Zhou Quan. The Zhou Quan whom they bullied as a slave was already dead. When the task was completed, he died completely. The person in front of him now is Gao Zhou, a ruthless player. Facing the steward's nearly collapsed plea, Gao Zhou finally raised the corners of his mouth slightly. Don't worry, I won't kill you. As he spoke, Gao Zhou let go of his hand. But at the same time, 3 slender silver needles were clamped in the palm of his hand and aimed at the steward's head. Puff puff. 3 silver needles penetrated the steward's head. The steward's pupils tightened, and the fearful expression on his face gradually relaxed. As Gao Zhou moved his fingers slightly, he stood up numbly. Come on, come with me to meet our old owner. Gao Zhou urged the steward to go out. Hey, Xiao Zhou. The old man behind him was stunned for a second, and then he hurriedly called him to let him go out together. However, before he could finish his sentence, when the old man saw the bloody murderous aura in Gao Zhou's eyes, he immediately swallowed back half of what he said. His tongue seemed to be tied up, and he came out tremblingly. 3 words, you walk slowly. Early the next morning. As soon as dawn dawned, the iron gates of Dashilan were opened. The shop assistants on the street came out, removed the door panels, cleaned, and started a new day of life. 4th, why do I always feel like something is wrong today? The shopkeeper of the grocery store shook his neck and walked slowly downstairs, holding a purple clay pot in his hand. When the clerk heard this, he scratched his head and said, yeah, I always feel like there's something wrong with it. After saying that, he patted his head. Hey, by the way, why didn't you hear the sound of morning training at the Hong family boxing gym today? Being reminded by the waiter, the shopkeeper immediately stamped his foot. "Oh, yes, I hear them humming and haha every day when they practice boxing in the morning, but today they suddenly stopped. I'm still a little used to it. Normally, before dawn, the boxing gym has already started morning training. Therefore, the first thing the owners of several shops around the boxing gym do when they wake up in the morning is to greet the 18 generations of ancestors of the boxing gym. Of course, I only dared to curse a few words in bed. After all, being a sandbag for others was not a cost-effective business. It was rare to get up early today, and suddenly the usual sound of boxing practice could not be heard, which inevitably made these shopkeepers feel cursed. "You pack it up and I'll go take a look." Seeing that the door of the Hong family boxing gym was still open, the shopkeeper walked up to the door with a precious purple clay pot in his hand. He wanted to see what the boxing gym was doing today. Why were they not training? Are everyone dead? As a result, as soon as he walked to the door, a strong smell of blood came out. The shopkeeper looked at the boxer lying neatly on the ground in the yard, with the purple clay pot in his hand. It fell to the ground with a bang sound. The sound of the purple clay pot breaking made the only steward standing in the courtyard slowly turn around. He was covered in blood and holding a big knife in his hand. He bared his teeth and smiled at the shopkeeper. "Come to practice boxing, come in quickly, let me teach you." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 374. Early the next morning. Keishakao is very lively. It used to be very lively here, Keishakao, but it is different today. Most people come here not to sell vegetables, but to kill people. I saw several prison cars pulling prisoners straight to Keishakao. Now is the time when autumn and winter alternate, everything is depressed, the grass and trees are withered, and the cool breeze blows on the street, and the ears feel like they are about to freeze, and it hurts from the cold. Especially in the capital city, stoves are now being set up in every house. People have begun to spend money to stockpile coal in preparation for the winter. At the entrance to the vegetable market, several women were standing there waiting with baskets in their hands. Not long after, several prisoners were led to the execution ground. In the cold weather, the prisoners only had a thin layer of clothing on them, and their bodies began to tremble uncontrollably as they knelt on the ground. The window on the second floor of the tea house has the best angle to watch the execution, with a wide field of vision. Usually, whenever there is an execution, there must be a sea of people here. There has even been a tragedy where too many people were lying on the fence, causing it to break, causing many casualties. In reality, this store would have been turned upside down a long time ago, but the funny thing is that in this era, everyone just thinks it is an accident, and the store just compensates for the medical expenses and that's it. But today there are only 3 people sitting there, for no other reason than Su Tong has rounded up this floor. Rich people are so willful. At first there were a few people who were unconvinced, but when they heard that the person who booked the venue was Ma Hongwen, they turned around and left in dejection. Ma Chi was promoted again. After Xiang Gongbeo became the first auxiliary military minister, Ma Chi, who was a vassal of the Xiang family and was in charge of the 80,000 forbidden troops, was finally promoted to the official position and became a veritable admiral of the 9 gates. As for the previous 9-door admiral? No, he was kneeling down at the food market. He was accused of corruption, accepting bribes, disregarding human life, covering up the Red Lantern cult and arson and committing murders. Any one of these crimes would be enough to kill this big man with 1,000 cuts. But was it really because of these crimes that he was taken to Keishakao? Apparently not. After I got home yesterday, I heard my father Ma Chi say that this position was obtained by the Xiang family and Prince Rong. What should I exchange for it? March didn't say. However, the admiral of the 9 gates was not only stuck at Keishakao because of his passive position. Su Tong recalled last night, Ma Chi's face was half bright and half hidden under the oil lamp. When a farmer gets money, the first thing he does is always put down his hoe and put on clean clothes to sever his past. The poor tools are thrown into the garbage, and he still doesn't understand why they were abandoned. What an injustice! The middle-aged man who was being held on the execution platform shouted at the top of his lungs, but no one redressed his injustice. All he got in exchange was a ruthless slap in the mouth and a smelly rag. So, your side mission is completed. Su Tong took a cup of hot tea and took a sip. He held the cigarette rod in his other hand and started smoking slowly. The smoke clouds lingered around him. The smoke clouds warmed by the chimney were inhaled into his mouth. In this cold season, there was something special. Flavor. Gao Zhou glanced at the steward kneeling there at the entrance of the vegetable market and nodded solemnly, "It's done. There should be follow-up, but I don't want to do it." The follow-up he was referring to was naturally the person imprisoned in the dungeon. This man was once the leader of the White Lotus section. He came to the capital and planned to find a few accomplished brothers to fight against the Qing dynasty and restore the Ming dynasty. Who would have thought that the group of junior brothers back then have now become military attaches, upright local officials, and can be considered to have a distinguished status? People, as long as life is good, who the hell wants to rebel? What's more, they now have a serious identity and are even less willing to become rebels. As a result, a few people set a trap and arrested this guy. You want to ask why not hand the person over to the government? This is a rebellion. If you hand people over to the government, not only will you not be successful, but even the martial arts school will be implicated. The official career of these people has come to an end. Besides, the White Lotus sect is not someone to be trifled with. If this group of people knew that their leader had been murdered, they would not come to the capital with a knife in hand. After thinking about it, neither the government nor the White Lotus sect can afford to offend him. But one cannot just let it go, otherwise the consequences will be endless. So as soon as they discussed it, they locked the person in the dungeon. According to the task process, if Gao Zhou released the person, there might be follow-up tasks. Gao Zhou did not release the person, and he was still inside. As for when he would starve to death, that was not something he considered. Su Tong nodded, "It's okay to leave it alone. With my current identity, there is no need for us to waste energy on those side tasks." After speaking, he took out a piece of paper and handed it to Wang Zhang. "This is the address of the Wu champion you are looking for. Let's go and have a look later." Wang Zhang squinted, took the note, glanced at the address, and smiled brightly. "Then take out the corpses from the prop book. Since there is no mission, don't waste your time. Do whatever you want with these corpses." After speaking, he pointed to the big box. "Only for this corpse here, you can figure out for me what is the condition of this corpse." Hiss. Gao Zhou looked at the corpses all over the ground, his eyes straightened. The other corpses didn't matter, but the corpse of Monk Huiwen almost made Gao Zhou fly with excitement. Half-step Grandmaster, for Gao Zhou, this is simply a treasure that cannot be exchanged for a lot of money. Rarer than the Emperor's concubine. Ha ha ha, get rich, get rich. If Wang Zheng hadn't been sitting aside, Gao Zhou might have been unable to help but rush forward and kiss Su Tong hard. A half-step Grandmaster is also a Grandmaster. Even if a few of them join forces, they may be able to kill a half-step Grandmaster, but the question is, can the body be preserved so completely? Gao Zhou excitedly put away all the corpses. As for the big box, he paid special attention to it. After opening it and looking at the corpse that was folded into a rice dumpling, he frowned and planned to find a place to study it. Wangzhuang village, 30 miles outside the city, is the land of the Ma family. I've said hello to the housekeeper. You can go and live there temporarily. There are few people there. You can do whatever you like with this place. I don't have the conditions to arrange a corpse refining place for you." Su Tong had already arranged it, so Gao Zhou was naturally happy, picked up the key on the table and put it in his arms. It's time. There was a loud shout on the execution ground, and a row of executioners stepped forward with knives in hand. As soon as these executioners came on stage, they seemed to be born with a terrifying aura that made everyone present involuntarily shut their mouths. Murderous look. However, it was different from the murderous aura of ordinary people. Su Tong looked with the help of his life ikumen and found that the murderous aura on their bodies actually contained a certain amount of compassion. The executioner's profession itself can be considered a sinister profession. It is said that killing can only be done with a nod of the head. The wonderful thing about the executioner's practice lies in this sentence. What was severed was the head, but also the injustice and the unquenchable resentment all over his body. Therefore, their killings are somewhat different from ordinary killings, and occasionally they encounter some strange criminals. If you don't have enough skill, you'll be in big trouble if you keep killing people with one stab. What an injustice! When death was imminent, those who were held on the execution platform were so frightened that they dared to say anything but could not say anything. A mouthful of realgar liquor was sprayed on the gleaming broadsword, and Su Tong could even see the blade glowing red under the influence of the liquor. Cut. As soon as the words fell, the swords were chopped down in unison. A huge head rolled to the ground. Blood spurted into the tub that had been put down early. Su Tong squinted his eyes and saw a special aura blending into the bodies of these executioners the moment their heads fell to the ground. It's hard to say whether this aura is good or bad. The good thing is that such people won't encounter ghosts even if they walk at night every night, and even their neighbors can take advantage of it. Wherever you pass, ghosts and gods retreat. But the bad thing is that even if such a person does not have a master to introduce him to the family, he cannot escape the shackles of 3 disadvantages and 5 shortcomings. He will either not end well or have no heirs. Even if you have some extravagant wealth, you can only have 3 meals a day, and there is no way to get promoted. Quick, while it's hot. The women who were guarding outside the execution ground suddenly rushed in. When the officials saw this, they did not stop them. They rushed in and gave a sum of money to the executioner. That's steamed bun money, and it can be regarded as an honest income for the executioner. He opened the bamboo basket in his hand and took out the white steamed buns. Nowadays, white flour is a rare commodity, but they dip the steamed buns in the blood basin. The blood stained the buns, making them sickly red. But these women don't care about this. In their eyes, these steamed buns stained with blood are life-saving magic medicine. An old woman held up a steamed bun stained with blood, turned around and ran away. The fresh blood was still steaming in the cold winter. The old woman ran while chanting, "My son is saved, my son is saved already. Is there really any hope?" Su Tong glanced at the steamed buns and shook his head regretfully. This still reminded him of that sentence. Smash the Buddha of reality and get rid of the demons in your heart. It's just that in the context of this era, the real Buddha is also the real demon. From imperial power to folk customs, the control of power is pervasive. In their view, this is just a kind of spiritual sustenance and comfort for the people who are in deep trouble. Although it is despicable, it lacks compassion. But Su Tong didn't see it that way. In his opinion, this compassion was like a steamed bun stained with human blood, with only 2 words inside and outside: eat people.